Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Dr. Green, and we are talking about DBT inspired tools for helping and working with clients. We are right at 12 o'clock, and so there might be a few folks who will be trickling in. So they'll be kind of joining us. But as always, I'm going to kind of go over what we can expect today. We're going to do a little bit of homework. If you have any questions or things you're wondering about, please feel free to use the chat. Stephanie is monitoring the chat. If there are questions that come up afterwards, feel free to kind of email. Hopefully, you've all been able to download the slides that are available, as well as get some homework in. The homework from our last meeting was to practice a distress tolerance skill. In DBT, it's important for the providers to practice the skills before we teach them, as we teach them, because when we are working from our own experience of the skill, it actually helps us to understand the benefit of using the skill and also some of the challenges with implementing the skills. And so self-practice is really important, which is one of the reasons that I give you all homework at the end of our session. So there will also be homework today. So today, we're going to be talking about emotion regulation skills. We started off with mindfulness, we moved into distress tolerance, and now we're going to talk a bit about one of the things that often brings clients into our sessions in the first place, and definitely brings a lot of DBT clients into session, that their lives feel out of control, their emotions feel out of control, their relationships aren't going the way they want them to. Maybe they don't have a solid sense of self, which is also connected to difficulty with emotion regulation. So we're going to talk about some skills and some ways of thinking about emotions and emotion regulation to hopefully alleviate some of the suffering that can come with dysregulated emotions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's get started. All right. Okay. So we're going to review homework. I'm going to reintroduce the 5 options for responding to a problem and show kind of where we are in that framework. We're going to talk about the functions and the meanings of emotions from a DBT perspective, as well as introducing the purpose of emotion regulation skills and introduce several emotion regulation skills. There are other skills out there for emotion regulation, but the ones we're going to talk about today are really kind of the fundamental, the foundational ones. So we're just going to take a few moments, about 4 minutes, like we did last session, to spend a little bit of time in small breakout groups, where I would like you to talk with your partner about one of the skills that you chose to use for homework and the situation that you chose to use the skill in. I'd like you to think about what felt challenging about using the skill, or what felt easy. So we're going to do 4 minutes in breakout groups, and then we will return to the main group. Stephanie, take it away. All right, everyone's coming back. Is everyone back? Okay. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to share with your partner how your practice went. So I'd like folks to think about what your favorite skill is so far. What do you think is the skill you are most likely to use with your clients? What do you think might be most helpful for them? If you could just kind of drop that skill into the chat. I know for my DBT clients, they often end up with a pet skill, their go-to skill. I have one client who uses check the facts all the time. So just from what we've learned so far, if you could just drop in the chat the skill that you think might be most useful for your clients. And I can't see the chat, so I don't know if people are responding. Can you see the chat, Stephanie?
Yeah, no one has a chance. Give them another couple of seconds. Dear man, someone did say dear man.
Okay, dear man. Anyone else? No other skill? Using the 3 states of mind, thinking about the how or what skills of mindfulness, the stop skill.
Accept reality and stop just showed up in the chat.
Okay. You only have 2 folks who are using skills? Gosh, y'all, I gotta do better if we only got 2. One more? Okay, well, hopefully, okay, look, we got one more. What's the next one?
Mindfulness.
Okay, mindfulness. Okay, so hopefully at the end of our session today, you will have some skills that you can kind of think about applying to clients. Sometimes when I'm in a training, I like to have a client in mind. And so I can really think about how I can utilize what I'm getting from the training in my work. And so it could be helpful to just kind of call up someone that you normally see or a concern that you normally see, and to see how kind of these skills would fit with that concern or with that person. All right, so back to the problem-solving framework. You've seen this a bunch of times before, but I just wanted to locate the emotion regulation skills within this framework. So the first part of the framework is to solve the problem. If you can't solve the problem, then you work on feeling better about the problem. And the way you feel better about the problem is using your emotion regulation skills. So from a DBT perspective, emotions have particular functions. They are not random. They don't come from kind of nowhere. DBT has a fundamental assumption that behavior is caused, and that includes emotions, that emotions have some story to them. And so when I talk to my clients about emotions, I talk to them as experiences that are often worth paying attention to. Now, paying attention to emotions and recognizing them as valid is not the same as saying that emotions are facts, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So recognizing that emotions aren't random and that they are communicators. Our emotions communicate to us how we're doing and what we're thinking about, but they also are creative. And what I mean by that is our emotions also communicate to us the story we are telling ourselves, the story we're telling ourselves about the fact that our supervisor came in that morning and didn't greet us, the story that we're telling ourselves about our spouse being late calling us, the story that we're telling ourselves about not getting the promotion that we wanted. So our emotions are both communicating to ourselves and to other people about how we are responding, and they also are indicative of the story, the narratives that we are believing about our experiences. Emotions are also connectors. I tell my clients all the time that if you are numb or disconnected from your own emotional experience, then it's really hard to connect to another human being, because we connect to each other from an emotional place, from that space of kind of empathy, right? Mirror neurons, for example. Emotions organize our behavior for action. So when we feel angry, we might want to punch something, we might want to yell, we might want to set a boundary. When we feel loving, we might want to draw close to the object of our love. We might want to hug, for example, express physical intimacy. All of that is governed by and organized by our emotional experience. There's not a value judgment on emotion mind in DBT. So it isn't that we are overvaluing logical mind or reasonable mind and saying, well, emotion mind, we just need to minimize that and put that in the corner. We're recognizing that these 3 states of mind are really important to pay attention to. And so while we don't want to spend all of our time in emotion mind, we also don't want to spend all of our time in reasonable mind. And so emotion mind in DBT is kind of value neutral, and so are emotions. Emotions aren't really positive or negative in that kind of way. And emotions are largely impacted by invalidating environments. So when we first talked about the biosocial theory, which is one of the foundations of DBT, we talked about the experience of invalidation. Often when a child is raised in an invalidating environment where they are not recognized, their emotions are not taken seriously, it's often at the emotional level that you can see the impact of that invalidating environment. So what are we even talking about when we talk about emotions? I wanted to show a clip from this movie which many of you have probably either seen or heard of, and it's a kids movie, but I think there's so much in it that can be useful for adults and useful for understanding emotional experience. And so I thought we would kind of take a couple moments and just watch a few minutes. Of course, if I can find it. Something maybe that'll help. Okay, I'm gonna look one more time, and then if it doesn't want to cooperate with me, I will not force it. Let's see. Wait, let's try one more time. I guess my technology has decided,
Dr. Green, did you want me to try and see if I can share?
Yes, I'll send you the clip. There we go. Maybe you can pull it up. Okay, it's playing.
But there's only sound, not video.
That's so interesting because I can't see that it is playing. Okay. Can you play the video also, or share so other people can see the video and Stephanie?
Yeah, so earlier the sharing, I can hear the sound, but not the video. I don't mind trying. I can help out if you want me to.
Oh, no, you don't have to. I think Stephanie was trying. Any luck?
Let's see if this works.
Hey!
Yes.
Hey! Come on! Hey!
Hey.
I'm joy. This is sadness. That's anger. This is disgust. And that's fear. We're Riley's emotions. Ugh.
Thank you for saving us technically. So I really enjoy suggesting Inside Out to my clients because I think that there's a way in which a visual depiction of how our emotions work can be really helpful and really accessible. So if you noticed in that very short clip, we have the emotion, but then we also have kind of what the emotion is pushing Riley to do, right? The behaviors that are associated with that emotion. And although I haven't spoken to the writers, I imagine that it's not by chance that they chose those particular emotions. When we think about our emotional experience, we can think about our emotions in terms of primary emotions, which are kind of the emotions that hang out at the foundation of our emotional experience, and then all of the other emotions that are kind of offshoots of those primary emotions. And I'll explain kind of what I mean by that. But those primary emotions, which are sadness and fear and anger, joy, they communicate not only to us, but to other people, but they also come with an urge, an action urge. So of joy, for example, you saw the figurine kind of dancing around and kind of engaging in activities. The communication of joy is often one of kind of expansiveness, expanded capacity, a kind of lightness. And the urge is often to do something that continues that space of levity, to laugh, to smile, to share that sense of joy. Whereas something like fear, as you saw with Riley, there's this urge to hide, to shrink, to get smaller, sometimes to run away, sometimes to fight, right? It's the fight, freeze, and fight, freeze, and flee response, and which is naturally associated with fear. So we have the communication, oh, something is dangerous, I am vulnerable to something, and then the urge, so I need to do something to keep myself away from the danger if I can. So really thinking about our emotions are communicating specific things, and there are also urges that are associated with those emotions. And that will be important as we think about the skills, because part of what the skills speak to is helping to think more carefully about what those urges are and to make decisions about whether or not it makes sense to follow through with those urges at any kind of given time for the client. So here's an example of a feelings wheel. There are several kind of floating around on the internet, but I thought this one was super complicated, a little overwhelming, but also a really helpful, colorful depiction of the myriad of emotions that we can experience. And so you'll see in the middle, fear, anger, disgust, sadness, happiness, surprise, and bad. I'm not exactly sure what the bad one means. I don't usually use this feeling wheel. But those we can consider as our primary emotion. So you can see kind of the complexity of emotional experience. Instead of resisting any emotion, the best way to dispel it is to enter it fully, embrace it, and kind of sift through, right? Sort through your resistance. And I think this is really one of the essential pieces of emotion regulation, that emotion regulation skills are about enhancing, growing a client's capacity to manage emotions, particularly distressing emotions, as well as reducing vulnerability to emotion mind. So what's the problem? Well, many clients don't have the skills that they need to effectively manage their emotions, or they manage their emotions ineffectively, using avoidance, for example, self-harm or substance use, which can escalate or worsen situations. I remember the old saying, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Really kind of conveying the message that if I'm using the same tool across situations, then I'm treating every situation as though it's the same. And one of the things that emotion regulation skills teach clients is to try to bring the appropriate tool to the circumstance at hand rather than using the same tool. So avoidance is often a really popular skill for managing emotion dysregulation. Now, sometimes it can be helpful to distract, and sometimes it can be helpful to avoid, especially when we're talking about danger. But if we're using avoidance to stay away from sadness, to stay away from disgust, to stay away from jealousy, to stay away from grief, then we're actually missing opportunities to grow our ability to manage a myriad of emotions. And so it's important to let clients know that they have the options of many different skills for managing their emotions. Many clients may label emotions as good or bad and try to avoid the bad or negative emotions. And I know people think about this differently. I do not use positive and negative emotions. And the reason I don't is because all of our emotions serve a purpose for us. They serve a function. And often we try to stay away from those things that are negative and move towards those things that are positive. In my experience, many of my clients assume that they want to be happy, they want to feel joy. But once they get close to that space of feeling joyful, a lot of anxiety comes up, a lot of nervousness and worry arises. And so even something that is seemingly positive turns out to be quite uncomfortable for them. So I think when we talk about emotions as positive, there's this assumption that once I get to this place of goodness, then I can kind of stay there and that'll just be fine and I won't have to deal with any of the bad stuff. And when not dealing with the bad stuff, right, the so-called negative emotions, when we don't grow client capacity to deal with those emotions, then that actually does make it harder to reach the other side, the joy, the peace, the sense of contentment. And so I try to stay away from positive and negative judgments on emotions. Many clients, especially those with trauma history, but not only those, have trouble experiencing or trusting those so-called positive emotions. They're often waiting for the other shoe to drop, which often prevents them from being present with those emotions, which really dampens the emotional experience. Many clients haven't had healthy models for managing emotions, and so they lack the skills for managing their own. Many clients find that their emotions are unbearable, overwhelming, or confusing. And also, emotion dysregulation is just kind of a hallmark of borderline personality disorder. Many clients also see their emotions as facts. So if I feel it, it must be true. And emotions are valid, but they're not facts. And some trauma survivors, especially those with PTSD, have a really hard time distinguishing between danger and discomfort. And I will say it's not only people with PTSD who have this difficulty. And so one of our tasks as therapists, as interventionists, as educators, is to help our clients recognize the difference between danger and discomfort. This is a really important distinction, especially when it comes to thinking about how to proceed with our behaviors, because behaviors that we would use when we are in danger, which are totally appropriate behaviors, where we're trying to avoid the danger, we're fighting against the danger, we might even freeze when we are in danger. These behaviors are often not very helpful with anxiety and might make anxiety worse. So if I'm avoiding every situation where I'm experiencing anxiety, that actually makes it less likely that I'll be able to enter situations. So we want to help clients differentiate between discomfort and danger. A client's emotion dysregulation might even be present in session, which can impact the therapy relationship. And so the therapist needs to be able to hold that dialectic of acceptance and change, recognizing and having empathy with the client, and also encouraging skill use. So some barriers to emotion regulation: biology. Some of us are hardwired to feel more intensely than others, right? That's the bio and the biosocial model. There's the lack of effective skills, either because I don't know them or because I use ineffective skills instead of effective skills. Clients act according to fluctuating mood rather than wise mind. So when I feel okay, that's when I practice my skills. When I don't feel so okay, that's when I don't. I might feel emotionally overwhelmed, and also emotion myths. What are emotion myths? Emotion myths are the scripts that we all live by, clients included. And sometimes we are aware of these scripts, like they're pretty explicit, and sometimes they're not. Often our emotion myths or our scripts are reinforced for us, and they influence our behavior, whether we recognize that they do or they don't. And because we are often in circumstances that reinforce certain behaviors, we may not recognize that our scripts are at play or that our scripts are myths, because other people around us might also support that, right? Identifying these scripts can be really helpful in helping clients gain clarity about their emotional lives, about their behaviors, and also to help them create challenges to unhelpful or untrue statements. These scripts often can be and often are culturally influenced. So we all have norms about the appropriateness of showing particular emotions. We all have norms about the meanings of vulnerability, for example. And sometimes these myths are reinforced by our communities, our loved ones, and our families. I have the example of kind of the strong Black woman, right? And the strong Black woman idea is one where a Black woman is meant to be a caretaker for others, as well as somewhat emotionally restrictive, right? That you don't see many vulnerable emotions from her. And also there's the sense that she's super independent, right? She's very self-reliant. And this idea, this cultural coping mechanism is often reinforced by other factors outside of her, by her family, but also by social realities and cultural realities. And so paying attention to the ways in which emotion myths have been reinforced and continue to be reinforced by aspects outside of the client or the person. So I'd like you to identify the myth here. If I feel something, it must be true. If I allow myself to feel strong feelings, I will lose control. In every situation, there is a right way and a wrong way to feel. We should always look on the bright side and avoid negative feelings. Which of these are myths? Okay. So far, A is a myth, D is a myth. No one thinks that B or C are myths. Okay. We're still at A and D.
I
Okay.
think folks think that all of the myths or all of the choices are myths.
Or that none of them are myths. Okay. So this is a snapshot of the emotion myths sheet from DBT. And as you can see, all of them are myths. There is a right way to feel in every situation. Letting others know that I'm feeling bad is a weakness. Negative feelings are bad and destructive. Being emotional means being out of control. Some emotions are stupid. All painful emotions are a result of a bad attitude. I'm sure that all of us have heard one, many, or even all of these emotion myths at some point in our lives, and so have our clients. And so it's important for us to recognize what are my emotional scripts so that I can recognize which of those scripts might actually be mythical, and then I can help clients identify the same thing. It's important for us to pay attention to the lens with which we are approaching emotional experience, because that impacts how we're able to identify ways in which our clients are acting effectively or ineffectively. So we want to grow client competence and confidence in managing the inevitable ebb and flow emotional experience. And so here are the goals of emotion regulation skills. Help clients to understand and name their emotions. It's really difficult to regulate something that you cannot name. And so when clients say, well, I don't know how I feel, Dr. Green, or I don't know why I did that, then we have to have a conversation about, well, okay, well, what was happening in your body at that moment? Well, when do you remember having that same feeling before in the past? And when you remember how that felt in your body, what emotion were you normally feeling? Or I'll have them look at a feelings wheel and have them try to decipher for themselves what they could have been feeling, because the naming of emotions is really important. Now, many of our emotions are actually hard to identify or define. And so I think it is important to kind of give space to that sometimes it's really just difficult to verbalize what we're feeling. And it is often worth a shot. That languaging gives us a story. Languaging allows us to organize our experience. And when we feel disorganized, overwhelmed, and scattered, it can be really difficult to figure out what skills we need to use. So we want to help clients to identify and name their emotions accurately. We also want to decrease the frequency of unwanted emotions. Even though we want to increase client capacity, we also want to kind of help them feel less distressed more of the time. We want to decrease vulnerability to emotion mind by developing resilience and increasing effective coping skills. So these skills aren't just about coping with emotions effectively when they're difficult, but it's also about reducing kind of the need for emotion regulation skills, because generally speaking, you have a greater sense of overall well-being. We also want to help reduce emotional suffering in clients by using skills and not making things worse. What do clients gain? Well, increased emotion regulation is associated with more positive overall well-being. When we are able to teach clients acceptance, they have a greater chance of being able to reframe or reappraise their experiences. They also are able to connect with the present more. So mindfulness and improved emotion regulation, those are correlated and connected. Emotional avoidance is really often about an unwillingness to tolerate emotions. So when we grow client capacity, they become more willing and able to tolerate the myriad of emotional experience that they have. And some researchers have even suggested that when we attend to the mind-body connection, we can influence the physical experience of pain. How many emotions can you name in 1 minute? I'd like you to drop them in the chat, and I am going to start timing. Let's see. And go. How many emotions can you name in 1 minute? I know this is very participative today. Participatory. That's the right word. Okay, you have about 30 more seconds. Twenty more seconds. Ten. All right. Stephanie, if you could just quickly scan, what's our average?
There were about 30 responses. And some people put in like quite a few at a time, and some folks did just one at a time. So yeah, I would probably say about 30.
Okay.
People were able to write in 30.
Are they 30 different emotions?
For the most part, they're different. Yes, there's some overlap.
Yes. Okay. So the average person, and I've done this in a couple of spaces now, the average person can name about 3 emotions in a minute. And when I've asked this of mental health providers, I get somewhere between 5 and 10, which is much better, right, than the 3. And if you remember the feeling wheel that I showed you just a short moment ago, you might recognize that even naming 10 falls short of the mosaic of emotional experiences that human beings have. There are some estimates that human beings experience 27 categories of emotions, and it's actually quite rare that humans are experiencing only one emotion at a time. And so I'd like to just kind of highlight the complexity of emotional experience and how so many of us just are not as familiar with navigating our emotional experience in ways that are as effective as we might like to be. So let's talk about some skills for changing our emotional responses that are ineffective. These are the 3 skills that we're going to pay attention to for changing emotions. Remember, we have 2 main goals with emotion regulation skills. The first goal is to change ineffective behaviors, and the second is to reduce vulnerability to emotion mind. So this is in the first goal. Check the facts, opposite action, and problem solving. Check the facts. So before we go into skill use, we have to talk about when to use the skill. So the appropriate time to use check the facts is when we want to help the client change their emotions in a given situation, because the emotions are either inappropriate for the situation or they're too intense. Changing beliefs about a situation can change the emotional response to it. And we can think of emotion response in 2 main ways. An event occurs, we have a thought, emotions result from the thought. Or an event occurs, we feel something, we create a story about what we're feeling. So for example, I'm at work, I'm talking to my colleagues, my boss comes in, says hello to my colleagues, doesn't say hello to me. There is an event. I feel anxious, embarrassed, emotions. I create a story. Well, maybe my boss didn't talk to me because I was supposed to send her an email and she didn't get it. So maybe she is upset with me. Or maybe my boss didn't say hi to me because she doesn't really like me anyway. And so like, she's just ignoring me because she doesn't like me, right? So I have created a story based on my emotions. It also could go the other way, where first I have those kinds of thoughts and then my feelings are in response to those thoughts. So how do you check the facts? First, you want to identify the emotion you want to change. So in the example I just gave, maybe I want to change the feeling of embarrassment. So then I have to identify the event that's prompting the emotion. And I want to help clients identify the situation with as little judgment as possible. So I don't say, you know, my supervisor, who is so rude and so mean and so inconsiderate, came in and didn't even say hi to me. It's really just like her to do that. That's kind of judgmental. So we want to just look at the facts. My supervisor came in, I was standing with my colleagues, my supervisor greeted my colleagues and did not greet me. We want to kind of keep the identification of the event as neutral as possible. We want to keep out should statements, keep out absolutes, keep out judgments. Then in step 3, we want to identify any thoughts, assumptions, and interpretations that are happening. Well, my supervisor did this because she doesn't like me. My supervisor did this because she's a mean person. My supervisor did this because she is angry with me. After we help the client identify the stories that they're telling themselves, then we encourage them to consider, are there any other interpretations? What are all of the possibilities that we can think of being relevant to this particular situation? And do any of the other possibilities fit the facts? Do any of the other possibilities fit the situation maybe just as well or even better than your own stories? Next, we want clients to identify whether or not they are assuming a threat. Remember, the way we respond to danger helps us to get out of the danger. But if we are responding to discomfort in the same way that we respond to danger, that actually can make the discomfort worse. So are clients assuming a threat? And if they are, what is the threat that they are assuming? So my supervisor didn't talk to me and, you know, she didn't do it because I didn't send that email to her. And so then I consider the possibilities, or maybe she was just having a hard morning and she didn't have time to talk to me, or maybe she was greeting me and she didn't look at me. So I assumed that she wasn't talking to me, but she was greeting all of us at once. Or maybe she's just feeling really stressed anyway. And like it was lots of traffic and she's just trying to get to the next thing. Maybe she's running late. So am I assuming a threat? So when I'm embarrassed, am I assuming a threat? Well, yes, actually, I think that embarrassment is connected to I'm worried that she is disappointed in me or will give me a bad review for not responding to her email or sending the email I needed to send. So now that we know that I have assumed a threat, well, let's think about how likely it is that that threat is possible, right? How likely it is that that threat is probable. And what are the other possibilities? If the threat is not that probable, what else might be happening? And then what is the catastrophe? And I think this is a great question because sometimes when people have trouble with emotion regulation, often they live at the extremes. Things are really, really great or things are really, really terrible. And if things are really, really terrible, then there's some catastrophe happening. So we want to help clients think about, well, what is the catastrophe that I am worried about happening? Well, can I imagine that the catastrophe happens? Can I imagine that my supervisor does have a conversation with me about not sending the email? Okay, and so if that does happen, like how could I cope with that catastrophe well? And then finally, do my emotions or do the intensity of my emotions fit the facts? And if they do, then I have one course of action, right? If my emotions do line up with the facts, I have one course of action. If the intensity of my emotions don't fit the facts, right? So maybe my emotions fit the facts, but their intensity don't match. So I can be annoyed or embarrassed about something, and maybe the emotions fit the facts, but I'm holding on to it. I keep nurturing it and talking about it. The intensity, the bigness of my emotions don't fit the facts. Or maybe my emotions don't fit the facts at all. If my emotions don't fit the facts at all, that's when we talk about the next skill, opposite action. But before we get to opposite action, what might get in the way of a client checking the facts? The client might be too emotionally dysregulated to access skills. They may not have practiced the skills enough before they get into a situation where they're emotionally dysregulated. They might practice part of the skill, but not move all the way through to the end, right? So they might stop at what is the catastrophe, or they might stop at, am I assuming a threat? And you need to use the whole skill in order to get the benefit of it. It's very important to check on the client's practice because this skill can actually be kind of complicated, especially if clients say things like, well, I mean, if she had come in and greeted me, or if, if she was the kind of boss that she should be, then she wouldn't have acted that way. These are all stories. These are not about the facts that happened in that particular situation. The clinician also has to balance between validating those emotions. Yes, I could see how embarrassment could come up for you. I could see how anxiety could come up for you, especially because you were already nervous about those things, while also maintaining a space for skill development. And can we think about what happened in that situation and how checking the facts could apply? This is also where referencing the functions of emotions is really, really helpful. Because if I am a client and I'm feeling afraid, you want to help me figure out whether or not a threat is really present. And if a threat is present, then maybe fear makes sense. But if a threat isn't, then maybe there are other ways I can think about these kinds of situations, right? Because we want to think about the functions of emotions as helping clients to recognize how their emotions do or don't fit the facts of a situation. But again, what if the emotion is appropriate, right? What if the embarrassment checks out? What if the sense of anxiety checks out? Okay, well, then you want to ask, is it effective to act on my emotions? And this is where mindfulness and wise mind comes in and helps me to figure out, well, if I tell my supervisor off the way I'm thinking about because I'm embarrassed, like, will that be helpful for me? Or if I avoid my supervisor all day because I'm nervous, will that be helpful for me? And if it isn't effective for me to act on my emotions, then I don't act on my emotions, but I do the opposite. The opposite action skill is essentially acting opposite of your emotion urge. all of our emotions come with particular urges, as that little clip showed us. And so the opposite action skill says, well, instead of hiding, like I normally would do when I feel anxious, maybe I'll reach out. Instead of telling off my supervisor, as I might normally do when I feel embarrassed, maybe I'll think about having a conversation in a different way. We do want to help clients learn to trust their own perceptions. We just want to help them also have the skills for managing their emotions and their perceptions when they're accurate. So what is opposite action? Opposite action is the skill you use when emotions don't fit the facts, or acting on the emotions would be ineffective. So if my emotions, I do check the facts and my emotions don't line up, then it's time for some opposite action. And in order to do opposite action, we have to know what our kind of natural or normal urges are according to our emotions. So every emotion has an action urge. You change the emotion by acting opposite to its action urge. And here are some examples. So for the emotion of fear, avoidance, right, is the action urge. The opposite of avoidance is to approach. Anger, the action urge is attack. Opposite, gently avoid. Sadness, the action urge is to withdraw, isolate. The opposite is to get active. Shame, the action urge is to hide and avoid. The opposite is to tell the secret to people who will accept you. I always tell my clients that shame doesn't do very well in the light, right? As long as we're holding and hiding secrets, then shame can thrive. But once you shed light on the thing that feels unspeakable, it's really hard for shame to survive. So how do you do opposite action? Well, again, you got to identify and name the emotion that you want to change, check the facts to see if your emotions fit the facts, identify and describe the actions that are associated with the emotions, right? So I go through, check the facts, and I figure out, well, how would I normally respond when I'm feeling embarrassed? How would I normally respond when I'm feeling anxious? And then ask wise mind, okay, if I act those ways, what might happen? Is acting on my emotions in my best interest? Does it align with my values? And then if the answer is no, I engage in opposite action all of the way. I have to do it fully. I can't partially do it, right? Like I'm pretending to have a cordial conversation with my supervisor, but really I'm being passive aggressive, or really I am kind of being ironic. No, I have to honestly, genuinely approach a conversation with my supervisor from openness and curiosity. You also want to continue with opposite action until the emotion changes. It may not be enough to just do one thing. You may have to actually do several things in order for the emotion to change, because utilizing opposite action is meant to change emotional experience. Common physical opposite action responses. So anger, right? Clenched fists. So you want to relax the jaw. Disgust, you want to help clients engage in paced breathing, relax stomach muscles, unclench teeth. Fear, you want to help clients adopt an assertive body posture, actually look up rather than looking down. Jealousy, willing hands and half smiling, that's the kind of open hands. And love, opposite action to love is instead of leaning in, leaning out. Now, why will I have love here? The rest of the emotions that I had before were ones that might be distressing. Well, you might have a client who's in a situation where they're loving someone who's not very good for them, right? You might have a client in a situation where they are in love with someone when they are in the context of abuse or trauma. And so sometimes you do want to help clients think about the opposite action to love. We're not going to convince clients not to love someone just because that person might be abusing them. But what we can help clients do is to change their behaviors, change their actions when those behaviors are actually not in the client's best interest. So what are some barriers? Well, maladaptive reactions may have been reinforced, and clients may not really buy into the idea that opposite action is going to be helpful. Remember, all behavior that continues has been reinforced. Clients also may not have a lot of practice with opposite emotions. And so what those behaviors are, and so they may not really kind of know what they are supposed to do to act opposite. They also may feel like they're responding in a disingenuous way, and maybe at first they are. And so there might be a little bit of fake it till you make it, but participating fully will allow for the possibility of emotions to change. Clients may only partially engage in opposite action, which will make it less effective. And it can be very difficult to use this skill because it really does push against default emotional responses. So what's skill number 4? Problem solving. We've been talking a little bit about problem solving as we go along because we've been talking about kind of pros and cons, which is going along with problem solving. But the problem solving skill in emotion regulation is to describe the problem, check the facts, and then identify your goal in problem solving. Identify a goal that can actually happen. So a client can't say, well, I want to change the way my mother thinks about me. You might want to change the way your mother thinks about you, but that can't be your goal. Your goal has to be something else. Okay, I want to effectively communicate my emotions to my mother. Great, we can work on that. Brainstorm as many solutions as possible to the problem. Choose the solution that's most likely to work and try that first. Now you'll notice it says try that first. It doesn't say only try that. Problem solving is sometimes a matter of trial and error. And so we have to tell clients that. Put the solution into action step by step. And if that doesn't work, do something else, right? Go through it again. So clients have to have a bit of openness and endurance to use the problem solving skill, but it's an important one for them to learn. So how do we reduce vulnerability to emotion mind? Really turning down those distressing emotions. ABC, please. This really stands for how we can help clients think about their overall well-being in their lives. So this skill isn't really about a particular kind of situation. It's more about how a client is caring for themselves. So accumulate positive emotions, help clients to do things that bring them joy and peace and a sense of wellness. Build mastery, help clients to connect to activities that give them a sense of achievement and accomplishment. Cope ahead, think ahead about circumstances and situations that might bring distress and plan for them. Imagine coping with those situations well. And that increases the likelihood that a client will be able to do that when those situations come. Treat physical illness. We don't operate well when we don't feel well. Our mind and our body, they are connected. It's in the same house. So really helping clients to understand the importance of taking care of their physical well-being and how that absolutely impacts how they're doing emotionally and psychologically. Eat in a balanced way. Not too much, not too little. Watch emotional eating. Avoid mood-altering substances. For some clients, they can use mood-altering substances in moderation, but some clients can't. Harm reduction works for some, it doesn't work for all. So really helping clients pay attention to what they're able to manage when it comes to substance use in a way that is not disruptive to their lives. Balanced sleep. Most adults need at least 7 to 9 hours of good sleep. Even if clients aren't getting 7 to 9 hours, they should be getting enough sleep to feel rested. And if sleep is a problem for clients, then you might think about looking at sleep hygiene, getting them assessed with a sleep study to see if they have sleep apnea or insomnia, and really helping them to tackle sleep problems. Sleep is so important for so many aspects of functioning. And also daily exercise, aiming for at least 20 minutes. All of these pieces are really about taking care of the physical being, recognizing that there is a relationship from how we're doing physically to emotions and our psychology. Clients should not expect that engaging in these behaviors means that they will no longer experience emotional distress. And clients struggling with depression and motivation may have trouble, of course, doing any of those things. And so it's important to keep that in mind as you are building their plan to engage in activities, to choose things that are accessible and that feel doable for them. Clients may also underestimate the importance of sleeping and eating well for managing mood and cognitive well-being. I just had an intake with a client who told me, I eat sometimes. And so we talked about how eating sometimes impacts her overall well-being. When looking at eating behaviors, this may also be an opportunity to bring in other skills where you are paying attention to ways that clients are utilizing food. We can also substitute food for shopping, sex, all of these other behaviors that can be substitutes for emotion regulation skills. And some clients, especially those with trauma, may actively avoid treating physical illness or seeking medical care due to triggers, negative self-beliefs, etc. And so it's important to keep those things in mind when encouraging clients to utilize the ABC skills. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. And that is really the crux of emotion regulation skills. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you have any questions or things that you were wondering about, please feel free to reach out. Apologies again for the delay with the technical difficulties, but Stephanie saved us. Thank you so much. I hope that you are able to resonate with at least one of the skills that we talked about today. They are applicable to our clients' lives, but also very much applicable to our own. So please practice an emotion regulation skill over the next week. I will get Stephanie the handouts for today, and I think also for last week from the kind of bullet points, and get that to you. And also think about the skill or the skills that you think could be most useful for clients. And if you haven't practiced already, maybe try practice teaching clients a skill over this next week and see how they do. Take great care of yourselves, and we will talk next week.